but I'm going to shake it up a little bit. I'm going to go off script. So I'm sorry, Beth. They won't ask me to MC anymore. But all of this rich discussion is happening. So I'm going to ask for each table, have a representative to share out at least one of the ideas that was discussed, or whatever you like to share out from your table, to share with the whole group. So who would like to go first? All right. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. All right. There you go.
So we had a robust discussion, and when I say something, everybody on the table is invited to correct me. So the idea is, how do we have Byron Airport be more productive in terms of virtue of drone ability, drone travel, freight delivery? So one of the issues, and this could be an issue that DVTI takes up with community colleges, with all the business groups, with the cities and economic development directors, is we need to create the infrastructure ecosystem that would support more advanced manufacturing. So for instance, in the case of Byron, road connects, case of Byron, power, in the case of Byron Airport, water. Imagine if we're going to have EV planes, how long does it take to charge a plane?
Say 30 minutes most. The needs it to charge in 30 minutes.
Yes, the need is to charge in 30 minutes, not in 10 hours. So we have to, how do we get the power to the airport? And then that could be a whole northern waterfront strategy. How do we upgrade fiber optics? How do we upgrade power? So one way to beat the chicken and egg, we have several hurdles. One is power, water, access, transportation. The other hurdle was the education. How do we have some very good institutions in our area. How do we get the word out that it's cool to work on a drone, cool to work in life sciences, cool to work in medical tech, advanced food production? So how does DVTI and other business groups help the various community colleges and the other institutions to educate? There already are certificates out there, entrepreneur certificates, et cetera. We already have people who know the stuff. So how do we get that out there? So the last sentence is, how do we push the agenda for business development, jobs, quality of life jobs? And it's probably creating an ecosystem that then the companies will come to. I said, okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Since I'm already over here in this neighborhood. Oh, I have a volunteer.
Thank you very much. So we had a robust discussion. I'm going to stand up because I want to just be able to engage with everybody. So our table right here, we talked about some of the answers to the questions, and we also had a very robust discussion. So a few things in terms of training. George from Contra Costa County reminded us about the Earn and Learn program. How many people know about that? Okay, a few, but we really want to make sure that some of our presenters know about it as well, because it does provide tax credits if you're training people for jobs that you need people to do. So go talk to George if you'd like some more information, maybe during the lunchtime. In terms of trying to enable Momentum Station to support air testing, well, let's root for us to move forward with the redevelopment of the former Concord Naval Weapons Station so that we can get permission to do it, because right now the Navy will not let us. So that is step one for us to get control of the land. And then we had a really good conversation about, how people need to see what the value is. So for these different technologies. So the need to have a really good case. So adoption has to be what JAGS referred to as a needy use case, and the nuisance has to be worth it. So to translate that, we were talking about how Uber, started out where people are like, what is the needy use case? The needy use case was that nobody could seem to find a taxi anywhere, right? And so it became, the nuisance was worth it because, hey, if your neighbor has an Uber coming, every other day, that's not so bad, right? It's not creating that much more traffic in your neighborhood. It's very, very convenient. And then the last thing we talked about was how, there's all this different innovation, and it can be extremely painful if you don't have somebody who's a translator of regulations to the on the ground realities, right? And so we've had some success at Gomentum Station, you know, the largest secure autonomous vehicle testing site in the country, because we've had folks like CCTA and AAA who have helped every step of the way, the different companies be able to translate, okay, what's the reality on the ground and how do we make that happen for the tech companies? They're trying to innovate. But if you're a small startup who's trying to do that all yourself, it's very daunting. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next. Okay.
I'm reluctant to follow Carlin because she did such a great job of facilitating, but I will. We talked about a wide variety of things. We talked about some of the different types of jobs that are needed. And it's everything from very entry level all the way up to PhDs. But one of the hardest areas to find people is aircraft mechanics and people who have airframe and power plant certification. So that's a challenge for growing the companies like X-Wing, growing the airports and other companies. So we talked about, you know, partnering with 2- and 4-year colleges to be able to offer the kinds of training that people need, recruiting people coming from the military, getting young people excited about going into the field. But then we also talked about regionalism, and housing costs are a big challenge to recruiting people from elsewhere to come and work here, or having people stay here who are already here. And we talked about how important it is to develop a regional system of making sure that people can get from one place to another, that people who, particularly the pandemic has accelerated people wanting to work remotely, or at least not traveling into San Francisco. Does anyone want to add to what I've said, what we talked about? Okay, there you go.
Thank you so much. All right. What about, oh, okay. I love it. Volunteers.
Good morning, everyone. Our group talked quite a bit about the need for education and lobbying for a lot of our elected officials. We spoke quite a bit about this morning, the FAA regulations, and brought up the fact that most of the time when, unless you have like a congressional champion or someone who is much more, who gets kind of more into the weeds on some of these things, when you're lobbying some of these folks, there's an expected baseline of knowledge that they have that they don't necessarily have in many cases, especially with newer technologies. And so we talked about some different strategies on how to develop that baseline of knowledge, and maybe some potential elected officials to engage in this conversation more so. And then we had a robust conversation around the workforce development and the different types of education to jobs pipeline, if you will, including training and certifications through the community college here. And then lastly, we talked a bit about government experience on the local level, that making things, especially for some of the newer companies and even for them to engage on the local level, many of our cities have either like a warm handoff, or when a new business comes to town, hey, this is all the steps you need to go through, that has proven to be very effective. So best practice, talking about best practices around that.
Thank you so much.
Many of the things we discussed already were part of what we discussed as well. One of the things that really seems to make sense is the Bay Area has a great ecosystem already of innovators, of companies that are doing what they can to make aviation what it is today even better. And so what might make sense, in addition to what everyone else has said, is to bring on an advisory board of those innovators to talk about the skills that they need for the future. And what's really critical, we spend so much time in the aviation industry talking about the need for pilots, the need for mechanics, but there's so many other jobs that are out there. There's no single resource out there to touch those different data points. When you go to Girls in Aviation Day, that's great. They see the aircraft, they get excited about it. And then the parents come and say, oh, you don't want to go into aviation. You really don't want to be a pilot. You're not good with math. But those are all limiting beliefs. And what we need to do as professionals is outreach to the community and say, this is what being in government politics looks like. This is what a aviation finance professional looks like. This is what an aviation attorney looks like. There are so many avenues to become involved in the industry. And that's really what's missing, that connectivity. We need to start young and show what we can do and what we are creating together. And the key to that too, what seems to light kids up, and I've seen this before, and kids, I say that because I'm the mother of a 21 and a 19-year-old. So, but what they get excited about is sustainability. The moment you touch on that, you're speaking their language, and they get excited about our industry and not the flight shaming. So just my 2 cents on that last part.
Excellent, great, thank you. Thank you. All right. So my table talked about a couple of interesting themes. One was how there are 15 Bay Area airports, or so we think, and how they should be part of a network that these innovative aviation companies should be able to access through a single platform, and also to be able to access each other and network with one another. We also talked about how we didn't necessarily understand what parts really of aviation could be made autonomous. Like, what are those skill sets? How does that translate into reality, and how that needs to be defined and then placed into an educational setting or vocational setting, like many others have talked about. We were lucky enough to have someone from the Maritime Academy at our table. And so something that we realize is that there is no equivalent in the aviation industry for that Maritime Academy, and that something like that should exist. And finally, we talked about how the companies that we heard from, there was varying feelings on how they could interact with the government or Air Force, et cetera, and how we learned through the Maritime Academy that these pathways do exist. They are connected to vocations in the educational setting, but that, like we heard this morning, regulations need to become more open. The government needs to become more open to let these companies in, so that all of these pathways can actually connect.
Thank you.
It feels weird for me to have my back to everyone, so I'm gonna stand up. We also had sort of this it sounds like very similar conversations from the other tables, but some things that I do want to highlight is, other than space, we decided like local advocacy and education is something that can be used, resources that would help the field. We also talked about what kind of workforce does this industry required, and we realized it's really wide range. So things like technicians, software designers, electricians, engineers, transportation and specialists in logistics were needed, maintenance techs, cybersecurity. And so we also talked about how the local and private and public institutions can work together to educate the younger youth. We mentioned we have a manufacturing day coming up on our campus and well throughout our district, but it was really limited because not all of our community colleges share the same programs. And so how can we broaden the education for our countywide for the different regions so that everyone gets an opportunity to learn at what's being hosted at each of the 3 colleges.
Thank you. Thank you.
After you. Well, thank you all for your participation in that impromptu change. So as culinary start to bring out the food, wanted to just share a little bit more about DVTI. You have the information on the back of your pamphlets about the organization. And one thing they would really like to highlight is you are welcome to join the meetings, right, Beth? Well, everyone is welcome. So please feel free to visit www.dvti.org. And the meetings convene, they meet the first Thursday of each month at 3 p.m. via Zoom. So very convenient, very convenient. So it's almost lunchtime. It's coming. So you can definitely take a break. And as we reconvene, I'll let you all know when it's time to eat. I don't want to stand between you and lunch. So that's going to be at 11:30. So take this opportunity if you, the restrooms are right around the corner if there's a bio break or you need to check your phones and emails. But please come back and we will enjoy lunch as we prepare for our next guest speaker, Gregory Thale. Thank you.